kom dit wyd gesweef. Die lied van 'n volk se ontwaking, wat harte laat sidder en beef.
Ek smoeg vir die vrese waarmee ons moet lewe, vir guns en vir moord en vir rape. Ek smoeg vir die bad news, vir Zuma en sy views, van ons op TV moet kyk. Ek wil nie meer hoor hoe ons tieners begrawe, oor niemand hul steur aan die wet. Ek wil nie meer lees van affirmative action, of beklei om te hou wat ek het. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat liedjies sing en skryf en stry, voor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. Ek siek vir Malema, sy leuns en sy sê maar, ons hou maar ons mond en betaal. Ons kruip weg in kampe, word blind vir die rampe, en bid dat die Heer ons omhaal. Daar's Winnie Mandela, wat mense verbrand het, maar nou wil sy huil in haar hand. Die staatskas is leeg en die ANC jeug saai verwoesting en pyn deur ons land. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat liedjies sing en skryf en stry, voor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. Het betaal vir die grond, waar sy kinders se kinders kan bly. Maar sy huis en sy lande is nou in die hande van die vyand teen wie hy moes stry. Ons kinders verstaan nie, waar kom al vandaan nie, hul erfenis is uitgewis. Geen volkslied of vlag nie, en geen erewag nie, vir die helde wat daar nie meer is. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat liedjies sing en skryf en stry, voor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat liedjies sing en skryf en stry, voor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. En ons reg om hier te kan bly.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's edition of Radio Free South Africa with your guest hosts, Gertjan Zwiggelaar. Karin Smith, unfortunately, due to unfortunate family circumstances, is unable to take care of this program for the next while. And so for an indefinite period, I will hopefully be able to fill her shoes somewhat. Although it is a difficult task, Karin has established an excellent reputation for hosting this program and doing a real true crackerjack job of it. In fact, so well that she was awarded the #1 prize for the blogtalkradio.com and Resolution RDO Network prize for being the top blog talker with Radio Free South Africa, which has been her baby for some time. and she has been very effective with regard to raising awareness pertaining to South Africa and unfolding issues there. And so, being a Dutchman, I was born in Amsterdam and moved to Canada with my parents in 1960. I was 9.5 years old at the time, and that was quite a culture shock. It still is to some degree. But because I am Dutch, I have a very strong affinity to the affairs of white people in South Africa. There definitely is a genetic connection, and I think many of us who are white and from the Netherlands likely feel that connection, that with those people, that special connection with those people who are the ancestors, the descendants of Dutch Boers, Hollanders, who came to what became Cape Town and eventually evolved into a mighty nation, that being South Africa. Anyway, South Africans are in a lot of trouble, especially right now in Cape Town, where a water crisis is very rapidly unfolding, in that the water plants and the incredible stresses that have been placed on the water treatment facilities of Cape Town, the influx of ever more people depending on that water supply, the dependency has grown so great, and the plants are older and being under the control of an ANC communist black Negro government. It is actually typical of the sorts of things that do tend to unfold in situations where the blacks are the number one group controlling the levers of power in government in the nations of South Africa, not just in South Africa. I mean, we've seen the complete dismantling of a once mighty white nation called Rhodesia, which is now, as Donald Trump would put it, a shithole, and it's called Zimbabwe. But that's another story. This is Radio Free South Africa, and so let's continue our focus there. The unfolding problem in Cape Town has raised a lot of questions from people, and so those of you listening to this program and who have people in Cape Town, or indeed who are in Cape Town listening to this program, it is advised that you do not use seawater, do not use salt water to flush your toilets. It's important that you save your gray water, save the water that you use to do your laundry, to wash your dishes, the water that you may have used to, if you can still do that, run a tub of water for a bath. But given the incredible upcoming stresses on the water supply systems, I think that one needs to be very, very careful how one uses water there, and do not use salt water. It will absolutely corrode the cleansing systems, the scrubbers and so forth in the water treatment facilities. So no salt water, just use gray water. It's going to become a problem, and it's not. Doesn't take a lot of rocket science, a lot of deep thinking to recognize how critical this may in fact become. So if there is access to potable water, bottled and so forth, if there is still water coming from the taps, my recommendation is that you, in Cape Town, start seriously addressing this issue and storing water in whatever bottles, those 5-gallon commercial filtered water bottles, if you have them. If you haven't, buy some if you can afford to. And then of course, given the fact that with the affirmative action situation, those legislations in South Africa, and being Dutch, I can understand a very little bit of the Afrikaans language, and can pick up bits and pieces, and did so during the opening song, which I've listened to now on a number of occasions, having now this being the third time I'm hosting this program, and having been on the program with Karin a couple of times, and having listened in on some of her archived shows. And so that song and the words affirmative action are in that song. And of course, those of you who are not aware, but those of you who are, affirmative action is something that is very bad for white people, and indeed has thrown a lot of white people of South Africa out of work, and has resulted in dire circumstances. I've spoken of this before, and now we have increasing numbers of white people, middle managers, people that operated trucks, people that were secretaries, people that were dental hygienists. All kinds of different walks of life have now been reduced to living in squatter camps in a nation that was built by their ancestors. And this is a terrible thing that's happening ever more in South Africa. And given the natural propensity to violence that is exhibited by a fairly significant percentage of the Negro people that have eventually increased their numbers and now are somewhere around 40 million, and the white people are under 4 million, and murders are incredibly numerous in South Africa. Indeed, figures have come my way indicating somewhere around 90 people murdered per day in South Africa, and that the most dangerous job on the planet now is to be a white Boer in South Africa, a white farmer. Now, those 90 murders per day is not all white people. The Negroes are still very tribal, and the ancestors of the Negroes, the black people that live in South Africa, of those 40 million, many different tribes are represented, and they quite readily murder each other also. Indeed, cannibalism is still openly practiced, and that aspect of the Negro character has never left, in spite of all the well-meaning efforts and attempts made by missionaries pounding the Christian Bible and trying to teach, the gentle, peaceful, loving message of Jesus of Nazareth. But in the case of the Negroes that eventually drifted into the churches that were established by these well-meaning missionaries, it was just simply an opportunity for the Negroes to sit in on what they considered, interesting white man's mumbo jumbo and juju. And once the missionaries gave up in some of the areas, the Negroes pretty much drifted back to their older ways of being. And we did see, in fact, in Africa, within recent memory, some of those conflagrations, those tribal warfare, that tribal internecine warfare that is endemic in Negro land, and was very clearly identified in a marvelous book that you can obtain as a free PDF on the internet. It's called The Negroes in Negro Land, and is written by a man called Rowan Helper. This book was published in 1868, before political correctness destroyed people's minds. I mean, evermore that insidious mind virus has been creeping in and has rendered a whole lot of people, pretty well dumbed down and scared of their own shadows, afraid to express the truth, to express what they actually see, what they experience, without having to ask some authority figure whether what they are experiencing is in fact what is true. And so, it's a pretty sad situation. Other news coming from South Africa is that they are attempting to, in quick order, put into effect some more desalination plants. But of course, these things are not built overnight. But of course, desalination plants can be bought wholesale. What I mean by that is completely assembled and ready to plug in, and just simply need to be shipped to Cape Town from a supplier. And I'm sure that there are manufacturing companies across the Indian Ocean, indeed perhaps in India or elsewhere, so that they can literally ship several of these units to Cape Town, plug them in, and put them into service. But of course, it isn't going to happen overnight. But time is of the essence, and given the way things move, it could be a while before this actually is put in place. I hope that the South African government can get it together. The people in Cape Town, their government can get it together to have this happen within quick order before a very, very serious crisis unfolds. We don't forget that for people living in a home, an apartment, and doing what I suggest, collecting some water. Making sure that gray water is used for flushing and now what we talked about. But you have to realize that there are hospitals that are, of course, heavily dependent on potable water supplies. There are restaurants which, if they don't have access to potable water, well, their entire business dries up because they have no water to cook in. And then it makes me wonder, given that restaurants, are, at the lower levels notorious for cutting corners where they can, and it does happen that people get sick from food prepared in restaurants. Not even always the back alley little kiosks dispensing, whatever meat on a skewer. Perhaps it's rats or some big insect or, whatever, grilled. But even upper class restaurants have been known to have, sometimes had problems with various bacteriums in the kitchen. And so now, given that potable water will be a tremendous problem in Cape Town, even the upscale restaurants may very well have to, cut corners somehow or other. And not everybody is scrupulous. And so what I see is that the likelihood is that a large part of that entire restaurant sector of the economy will dry up, also with the dried up water supply. What are other places that are heavily dependent on water? Well, what about, excuse me, what about in a situation where there's a fire and now there's no water coming through the fire hydrant system. But then golly, something just crawled down my throat, which is unpleasant. Okay, I think that takes care of that for a moment. I think what I'll do is I'm going to play some music and clear my throat in the meantime, and then I'll be back with you.
What's up, everybody? This is Jordan Page. In light of the recent events in Oregon, I just wrote a song that I want to share with you. This is called The Ballad of Lavoy Finicum. Subtext, Cowboys Stand for Freedom. He was a man who loved to walk the land, turn his cheek but also take a stand. His conviction called, he followed what he felt was right. Well, there's no telling just what time will bring. You can live for nothing or for everything, but when the pushes come to shove, and tell me, will you find? I'm only talking about a cowboy stand for freedom. I'm just talking about a name carved in a stone, a friend and brother to anyone. He's riding off into the setting sun to ride on cowboy. He's heading home. Well, there's almost right and then there's nearly wrong as you live your life from sunrise to dawn, and then it's over and the moment's gone. You can testify to things unseen, but the world is blind, can't see a thing. All you can do is try to be a human being. I'm only talking about a cowboy stand for freedom. I'm just talking about a name carved in a stone, a friend and brother to anyone. He's riding off in the setting sun to ride on cowboy. He's heading home. I know not what course other men may take. I can't see that far down the road. But as for me and mine, make no mistake, the weight of justice is a heavy load, and I'm living by code. He left his home to go and take a stand as voice rang out across the deafened land, and in the end it was a bullet that exposed the lines. A truth God-speed cowboy will carry on.
And that was a tribute to Lavoie. I think that was Lavoie Finicum, if I remember his name, and we can talk about it in a moment. But I'm just getting used to people calling in on a program. I've never done that before, and I just noticed that somebody from area code 804 apparently was trying to call in on the program. So if you are still listening, you would like to try that again, I think I can figure out what to do. I mean, it's on the left side of my screen, and I didn't notice that until just sort of while that song was playing. Of course, those of you who have been paying attention to the news, you probably are well aware that Lavoie was murdered by a federal agent during a standoff between the federales who were implementing or trying to enforce, rather, some land claims that the federal government had on some rangeland that the family to whom Lavoie was a member, they had access to that land for some generations, and indeed similar circumstances exist here in Alberta, where I'm broadcasting from, where ranchers have access to Crown land, where for generations their cattle have grazed and been allowed to roam. And so the federal government trying to push Agenda 21, as you know, that what they did there with regard to Lavoie is part of the unfolding Agenda 21 story, and the federal government, of course, being completely controlled by an entity which has also continually gobbled up Palestine, regardless of what the initial promises were. And so they are trying to push everybody into the cities, into very densely packed urban areas, living in tiny apartments stacked high up, and of course with ever more unfolding of what was called by Alex Jones, and I think it's even trademarked, the idea of a prison planet, that this planet is becoming that, a prison planet. Well, looking at South Africa, for a lot of white people, it's becoming very much so a prison situation there, because they have nowhere to go. Once the Negroes, who, as I've said, have a very natural propensity to violence, and they are very overtly racist. In fact, I watched a YouTube video just this week, a few days ago, of this was a video likely with somebody's smartphone at a school, where a group of Negro children, and they were wearing school uniforms. So obviously, a South African school, I'm not sure if all the children wear uniforms in schools there or not, in the public schools. But anyway, this one black boy, and he looked like he was probably about 14, 15 years old, had a big brick in his hand, and he was stalking, just like a chimpanzee kind of does, sort of low down, and his knees bent, and he's this larger white boy, and suddenly, just without any kind of warning, just heaves that brick right into the side of this white boy's head. And the white boy's kind of just sort of shaking his head, and and I mean, he was kind of prepared for it in a way. He kind of saw that white or that black boy with the brick. But what struck me as strange, if that had been me, the white boy, and I was there at that age and so on, I would have first of all, I would have been paying closer attention to the trajectory of the brick, so it wouldn't have hit me in the head. I would have fended it off with an arm. But I would have I would have picked up that brick and I would have pummeled that kid with it, regardless of what the circumstances would have been. Indeed, that is something that's somewhat similar circumstance that unfolded when my first day in a Canadian school, where I had been set back a grade to grade 3 since I couldn't speak English. I only spoke a few words of English. I mean, I was only 9.5 years old, but in the Netherlands, when you start school, you have to be, 6. You got to be 6 years old. Well, my birthday falls in December. So by the time that I had my birthday in December and became 6, I still had to wait, another or over half a year to start school when I was almost 7 already, and then to be put back a grade when I came to Canada. So anyway, the circumstances were that I was allowed, it was my turn, if you will, to bat with a plastic bat a ball in a game of baseball, which coming from the Netherlands, I was unaccustomed to, never played before and had never seen, but had heard about. That's, the American game, the American sport, but it's not played in the Netherlands. It certainly wasn't back then. Maybe it's played there somewhat now. But at any rate, it was my turn to bat, and then some bigger bully boy, pushed me aside, knocked me on the ground, grabbed the bat, and presumed to position himself to, be hitting that ball. Well, I didn't take that lightly, and I promptly grabbed that bat from him. Now remember, I did tell you it's a plastic bat, and I am the age that I was at that point, and so I knew full well what I was doing. I knew I wasn't breaking any bones. I knew I wasn't going to permanently damage this boy, but I proceeded to pummel him with that bat. And as soon as the playground monitors saw that, I was immediately whisked into the principal's office, and I was strapped on my hands for doing that, which, I thought was rather strange. I mean, after all, I was standing up for myself. Now, this is in 1960, and September in 1960, so you got to realize that already then white people were essentially prevented from defending themselves and maybe pushed towards being wimps, spineless jellyfish, which unfortunately so many men have become. Indeed, if you read today's edition of Down the Rabbit Hole, which is going to be published on rents.com here, if it's not, it'll be there later today. I sent it off. Usually when I send my articles in to Jeff Rents, they're posted later in the evening, so you can watch for that. But it is basically very interesting collection of images, photographs, and it is titled The Suffocating Blanket of Islam. And, of course, that suffocating blanket is also very heavily present in South Africa. And if you read that article, you'll see why I brought that up at this point. There is a black preacher, his last name is Farrakhan, in the United States, who's actually openly, publicly speaking about murdering all blue-eyed whites. And we also are hearing similar ideas being expressed by government officials of the ANC in South Africa. Indeed, the former Prime Minister, Mr. Zuma, has been heard to sing the Kill Whitey Kill the Boer song, and is openly advocating the seizure of all white property without recompense. The new leader, who is just the new president of the ANC, who, if history continues to repeat itself, every president of the ANC since the time of Nelson Mandela has become president of South Africa. So this new individual, who is a wealthy businessman, pretty smart Negro operator, but very, very overtly racist and absolutely despises white people. And so, the circumstances of the white people of South Africa is going to continue to deteriorate. And indeed, I see what will unfold there is a huge humanitarian crisis, which I find it absolutely astounding that leaders of white countries haven't stepped up to the plate and are indeed seeking means to help the plight of the indigenous, and it's true, the indigenous white people of South Africa. Again, it's important to repeat that the only people that were there in that area of Africa when the white people came there from Holland were the Khoi, and the San, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, who came to be called, I believe it was Hottentots. Oh, pardon me, they were called the Bushmen, yes. And then the Khoi were called the Hottentots. But they're not Negroes. They're not the same genetic stock as those black interlopers that drifted down, murdering, plundering, raping, torturing. They're the ones that are laying claim to South Africa and the property of white people there. But the thing is, it's an absolute false claim. The only indigenous people are the Khoi, the San, and those white people that settled there in the 17th century. And so they're the only ones that have legitimate claims to South Africa. But in order to perhaps achieve perhaps a more beneficial situation for the Khoi, the San, and the white people of South Africa is to support the secession of the State of Good Hope from the ANC-controlled eastern part of South Africa. And that is the part that contains the gold, the diamonds, and precious stones anyway, and Negroes like baubles, and King Kuibaha Cornelius III of the Khoi, of the Khoisan people, represents the entire group. They have, in fact, legitimate claims to the land, that part of South Africa, which is pretty well half the country, and wish to secede and make that the State of Good Hope, a place where people with Christian values can live in peace and harmony, but the communists are not welcome. Indeed, the Judaic entity and their banking systems would not be welcome there either. People have suggested to King Kuibaha, well, why would you give up, all that part of South Africa that is where the diamonds and the gold and so forth are? And of course, he is a brilliant philosophical ruler, and he realizes that the future doesn't lie in that stuff. You can't eat gold, you can't eat diamonds. You can decorate yourself, but really it's worthless. What is most important is agriculture, and the area that would be the State of Good Hope, some of the richest agricultural land on the planet, To give you some idea, when some enterprising marijuana farmers from British Columbia sent some very prized seeds, 6 of them actually, to South Africa, those seeds were planted in particularly salubrious situation in South Africa, and within 6 months, those marijuana seeds grew into 15-foot plants. And for those of you who are not aware, the marijuana plant can in fact reclaim deserts because it is such a fast-growing plant that produces a tremendous amount of biomass, and per year can replace about 2 feet in diameter of sandy soil, desert soil, and over time, some decades, huge swaths of desert can be completely reclaimed. And in the case of the Kalahari Desert, the images that have been taken of the Kalahari Desert by satellites using special X-ray technologies indicate that indeed the Kalahari Desert was a very rich agricultural region at some time, long time ago, because it shows with these photographs that there are huge sort of waterways and dams and sluices and so forth, all the infrastructure necessary to carry on massive agricultural enterprises. And so, it'd be interesting to see what unfolds. But before the secession can take place, King Kuibaha has to take an entourage to a country that is willing to recognize the legitimate claim and to support the secession. But in order to have that happen, an entourage from the royal house, from the government of the sort of nascent state of Good Hope, a delegation has to go to that place and accept the letter of recognition. Well, in order to achieve that, it takes quite a lot of money, indeed about $20,000. But even though King Kuibaha Cornelius III is a king of a royal house, doesn't necessarily mean that he is rich like the Queen of England. Indeed, these people are not wealthy, and $20,000 is not easily come by. And so if any of you listening are willing to help with this effort, you can donate funds via the Radio Free South Africa.com website, and you can contact Karin Smith. There's contact information, but Karin is handling that for the time being. Also, if you wish to help with the plight of the white people in the squatter camps, many of whom are starving, or on borderline starving. Don't forget, these are children, old people, men who can't get work. The circumstances are very tragic, and there is an organization that Karin Smith is connected with that is headed by a woman, a brave and an awesome woman named by Lee Dupree, or Dupre. And so, if you have some funds, you can channel in that direction, and that would also be really great. You are listening to Radio Free South Africa with your guest host, Gertjan Zwiggelaar, on Blog Talk Radio and the Resolution RDO network. Because we are a radio service, and of course these sorts of things are not free, there are costs involved, and so we do have advertisers, and therefore I think it's time that we chose a few advertisements for your consideration. I have always said that an armed society is a civil society. It is a very horrible thing that due to democracy, which is a scourge It is a suffocating blanket that has caused a whole lot of malfeasance, a whole lot of criminals, a lot of members of that lying Judaic entity to take control of the levers of power. And they have disarmed us. Many of us have no firearms, have no way to defend ourselves against what is surely coming unless the brakes are put on immediately to this invasion of Muslims. Islam is not a religion of peace at all. And it is because of democracy that Islam can very well ultimately win the battle, because a Muslim man, can have 5 or 4 wives. And with those 4 wives, he can produce 4 children a year for how many years those women can produce children. So they are outbreeding white people hugely. And as a result, they will have more voices in the polling booths directing affairs, which result in, for example, already an attorney general of a province in Canada is a Pakistani Muslim, for example. Many mayors of large cities in England, in the United Kingdom, are now Muslims. In fact, there are quite a large number of Sharia courts already in operation there. It is a horrible, horrible situation unfolding, and democracy, if you're going to wait for the next, 4 years or 3 years, in the case of the United States, they finished their first year with President Trump and a new administration, and already the electioneering is beginning for 2020, and some have even been so absurd as to suggest Oprah Winfrey run for that august office, and that we would have a cultural Marxist Negro woman who is a darling of the Judaic entity that controls all the popular media, mainstream media on the planet. 6 individuals, all Jews, control 99.9% of the media. The only media that they do not yet completely control is, such free talk as what occurs on Blog Talk Radio on Resolution RDO Network. Indeed, you can hear this kind of talk, truth speaking, also on Down the Rabbit Hole with Gertjan and Andy every Friday morning on folkradio.com, and that's every Friday morning at 8 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, so that'd be 10 a.m. Eastern. And then I have my own program, which I host later that day at 8 p.m. Eastern, and that is Radio Free Stratosphericus, also on this radio network. News from South Africa. I'm going to just go through some of the headlines, news that apparently you should know, according to this news service. And this news service, in case you are not aware of it, it's News 24, South Africa's leading source of breaking news, opinion, and insight. Winnie Madikizela Mandela is discharged from hospital after a kidney infection. Implementation of the fee-free higher education is going well in the KZN, according to the deputy minister. And so in that particular area, they want to provide free higher education to all qualifying individuals. And of course, now that you know what affirmative action has achieved in South Africa, the free education recipients will, in 99.9% of the cases, be Negroes. Well, given the fact that the average Negro of Africa has an IQ of around 75, they're firing in the 75th percentile, which indicates if they were white in a white country, whites with a 75 percentile IQ, they would be institutionalized for being significantly mentally retarded. And then when you look at the fact that the average Somali has an IQ lower than that, indeed their average IQ is 60, oh boy, doesn't that make you wonder what's the point in giving them access to free higher education? It's not going to do a damn bit of good because they won't remember most of it. It won't really benefit them other than, they will get the right examinations with far lower expectations, come out with a degree in medicine or whatever. Now all of a sudden here they are a doctor, and I sure wouldn't want to be one of their patients. Rosatom signs its first deal in South Africa, and the ANC top six will discuss options with Zuma, says someone named Mantashe. So options with Zuma likely being whether they put in whether they give him amnesty, that sort of thing. I mean, Zuma has been, it's alleged that Jacob Zuma has not been the most honest of operators, and there are allegations of wrongdoing. Rule Peterson given freedom to attack. New Day Zero date announces Cape Town fights back. Well, that's to do with regard to the water issue. Principal, teachers implicated in high school sex video are removed. And so, shenanigans do accrue in schools. Even there are cases within our own Canadian public school systems where unscrupulous teachers have done some nasty things with impressionable young people. And golly, had I been an unscrupulous teacher, there were some very overt come-ons from girls. They can be, by the time they are already in junior high school, they can be overtly sexual creatures, and they have crushes on teachers. Indeed, there were lots of girls that had a crush on Mr. Z. And, in fact, I think I may have even been set up in a couple of cases. It was just too weird as far as I was concerned. But, of course, I looked at my students as my little brothers and sisters, basically, and I was just there to direct them and give them a good experience in either visual arts, in theater studies, or in graphic design, which are the areas that I taught. Apparently, Capitec is solvent, according to the South African Reserve Bank. There are culprits sowing division in Cape Town. The district attorney must be named. So apparently that's an issue. South Africa squad named for the Commonwealth Games. So, these annual, every 4 years, Commonwealth Games, and then you've got Winter Games, and you've got, Olympic Games. The incredible expenditure that nations incur, that nations basically subject themselves to, putting themselves deeply in debt to the Jewish banking cartels in order to host these events, these Olympic events, these, showing off of athletic prowess. Really, it is, I think, in my opinion, albeit I do think sports are wonderful and people should engage in sports. Indeed, I'm a strong proponent of Adolf Hitler's idea that children in schools should learn every ball sport and should spend at least 2 hours per day engaged in physical fitness programs, whether they play ball sports or whether they, in my opinion, they should be also learning all kinds of military skills and be trained so that when they come out of high school, they will be very fit, and they will know how to handle every firearm and military ordnance necessary to be effective militia. But of course, the Judaic entity doesn't want us to be too highly trained, except for those that they have sucked into the army life with advertising that there's no life like it, and that it's a pretty good deal. But I know people who were in the military and have come back with seriously damaged legs, damaged hands. One guy I know, half his hand was blown off when a hand grenade exploded. Another chap, his legs were both blown into many pieces when his vehicle drove over an improvised detonation device in Afghanistan. So these sorts of things happen to people that join the fodder brigade and fight people with whom we really have no issues, have never attacked our countries, have never declared war, such as Afghanis, and go there to be blown up and to be harmed, and to also blow up Afghanis, of course, if they can find them. But they're a very resilient people, and nobody, not even the Romans in ancient times, were able to overcome the Afghanis. And so the Western nations, NATO and so on, that are there trying to secure a right of way for a Jewish pipeline, oil gas pipeline, to come through Afghanistan. And of course the protection of the poppy crops to make sure that there is more heroin, cheaper heroin on the streets of North America, to further demoralize the youth and even a large part of the adult population, and have them hooked on a very deleterious drug that, if it wasn't illegal, in itself wouldn't be all that much of a problem, but because it's illegal, it's highly expensive, and once people are addicted, they'll do just about anything to get it. So that is what the Judaic entity preys on. They totally control that entire industry. Indeed, it is alleged, and really it's alleged by numerous sources, that a lot of that heroin that's coming into the United States and into Canada as well, coming in the body bags of dead soldiers, that was sent over there to be fodder. It's really tragic. Kenya switches off TV and radio stations over coverage of Odinga's swearing-in ceremony, and corruption in Africa is sometimes exaggerated, according to Jacob Zuma. Well, of course, I wouldn't believe two words coming out of Jacob Zuma's mouth. And it is really a wonder when you think about it. That man, who never passed grade 1, became president of a country, which was what one time, when the whites totally controlled South Africa, and that brilliant system of apartheid was in place, which honest Negroes will tell you was a system under which they, the Negroes, as well as white people, experienced far better circumstances than they are presently experiencing under the ANC, the African National Congress. So apartheid enabled every Negro group, and again there's many different tribes represented there, to have their own kraals, to have their own medicine men and witch doctors, and practice whatever juju mumbo jumbo they wanted. And everybody got along just fine that way. Indeed, the white people built the largest hospital on the planet in the middle of Soweto, a place that there's a heavy, heavy concentration of black people, Negroes, living there. So, if white people were so horrible and racist against the Negro, they would never have bothered to do that. Indeed, in these private, if you will, kraals, regions, tribal regions in South Africa, schools, hospitals, clinics, infrastructure, all of it was provided by the white people. And yet, look at what's going on now that the ANC has dismantled apartheid. The whole thing is falling apart there. And South Africa, which at one time was one of the richest, most successful nations on the planet, from which came some of the best doctors ever. Indeed, I have a South African doctor who has a brilliant old Dutch name, Johannes Cornelis, or Cornelis Johannes Klaassen. I mean, you can't get more South African than that. And he has become my friend, and he is my doctor. And I firmly believe, having engaged with several doctors from South Africa, and not that I'm a sickly individual, I'm not, but we do from time to time have to go see a doctor, and I have seen South African doctors and find that I like how they practice medicine. They're trained, I think, somewhat differently. They tend to listen to their patient more, and they will allow the patient to also direct the health care provision. And so that has been my experience. I mean, South African doctors do not have that attitude that they know it all and that the patient knows nothing. They don't have that sort of attitude. So anyway, that's a whole lot of yakety yak. And again, I apologize to whoever it was from area code 804 who tried to phone in earlier. Again, I have not yet taken any calls on these, so I didn't quite know what to do and didn't really see it in time, and so I do apologize. And if you are still listening, if you want to try it again, I'll watch and see. I'm sure I can figure out what to do. It's yeah. So anyway, let's take a break, and I think music is always a great way to take a break. And so what I thought I would do is, since I mentioned to you that I also have my own radio show, which is on Friday nights, I have a piece of music that I play at the beginning of that program. It's called Soft Underbelly. It runs about 3 minutes, 7 seconds. And so I thought it might be interesting for you to hear this. I'm going to try and modify the length of it in the near future. So when I open my show, I won't run it for the entire length. Just run it for, say the first minute, and then come in with the introduction to the program. But it is an interesting piece of music, something I composed in 2016 when I first started working with GarageBand. And this bit of music was entirely composed with a virtual keyboard and a mouse. It's called Soft Underbelly, and it's meant to, in music, represent that suffocating blanket that I talked about earlier, the suffocating blanket of Islam, slowly covering the Middle East. Yeah, so that was Soft Underbelly. There's a terrible thing that has evolved over time. Well, really, I don't think it's all that new, but increasingly more so, it seems to me, that politicians and corporate leaders are completely unaccountable and are immune from prosecution. And subsequently, they conduct a tremendous amount of malfeasance with impunity. And that really has to stop. People really need to start realizing that whatever happens to us because of the weird rules and support for satanic, diabolical ideas and regulations, that when we are hurt or killed as a result of policies that are implemented by our governments, these malfeasant individuals need to be held to account and charged with whatever charges need to be laid upon them in the event that somebody dies as a result of policies opening the gates to the invasion of Muslim chimp hybrids from Sub-Sahara and Central Africa, for example, as is in the case of Europe, where these creatures are coming across the Mediterranean on what appear to be allegedly George Soros supplying boats, very expensive, huge rafts, but also leaking boats, whatever they can fill up and bring over. And then there's a whole bunch of groups that boat out from the coast, as has happened in Greece and Italy. These so-called non-government organizations come and help these so-called refugees from war zones, allegedly. But they're all young men, fighting age young men, age generally 18 to about 40, 45, and some of them claim to be children, and somehow or other the officials of public school systems, for example, I'm aware of that happening in Great Britain and in Sweden, where 18-year-old or older Muslim, Arabic descendant Muslim, hive-minded, pedophilic psychopaths are let into elementary and junior high classes because they accept the claim that this 20-year-old is 14. And then they wonder, well, how come our girls are having some problems with these creatures? These creatures, they actually are taught by the Quran. The Muslims are taught in the Quran that the virgins that they will have access to when or if they manage to get past all the hoops and the hurdles, and Allah lets them into paradise, the virgins that are supposedly there are young houris, bashful virgins that are the color of corals and red as rubies. Well, for those of you who know something of, maybe Jacques Cousteau's specials, you've seen that, or those of you who do some underwater in the ocean swimming and so forth, you know that corals tend to be assorted tints of pink, and rubies are red, and white girls, when they're exposed naked in a slave market, they tend to turn red. Their skin turns red. It burns in the sun, so that's... And then, of course, also in paradise are young boys dressed in green livery. That's really, those are the inhabitants, the denizens of paradise, according to the Quran. You can read about the Quran in a book I put together under one of my pseudonyms, one of my nom de plumes, if you will, is Emmanuel Truthseeker, and it's called The Horror, an in-depth look into the Quran. You can find it advertised prominently in Rense.com and on my website, Stratofericus.com, or you can also go through Gertjan.ca, and it'll take you straight to Stratofericus.com, where you will also find DTRH archives, Down the Rabbit Hole archives, which are quite fun reading. I touch on lots of different subjects because I'm interested in just about everything, and I do enjoy putting those things together for you to raise awareness, and but also to entertain. And I use lots of illustrations now that I'm publishing in HTML, where before I was publishing 2 pages regularly as a PDF document that could easily be printed off and shared. You can go into Rentz's archives, and you will find Down the Rabbit Hole archived pretty well back to its beginning, not entirely. The very, very first issues that I put together, they are not really, well, they're extant in my computer bank somewhere, in my data banks, but they're not published out there on the web. They were on Facebook for a while. Speaking of Facebook, that's a very insidious medium that has now over 1 billion subscribers. I am now heading towards 530 days in Facebook solitary confinement on one of my accounts because, well, you know, I don't think that there is anything wrong with being proud of important white people's symbols. Indeed, I believe that the swastika, as it was used by the National Socialists under Adolf Hitler, was in fact a very beautiful symbol, and the flags of the National Socialist government in its various manifestations are indeed beautiful flags. And so I've used those flags and have been castigated because of that, and because of my opinions regarding the Judaic entity and the Muslim psychopathy. They have been monitoring my presentations quite a bit, and now I can't stay on Facebook any more than a couple of hours when the bots automatically identify me and bust me for things that I posted, which indeed were swastikas. One beautiful red dress worn by Taylor Swift with a big swastika on the belt, my favorite red dress, and then flags. Yeah, so Facebook controls a lot of conversations, because if you use Facebook to log into various things, if you are busted in Facebook jail, then you cannot access those other opportunities to comment. So, they're controlling more than just the Facebook venue. And I think that's a really terrible thing. And really, we shouldn't be tolerating that. I mean, why should we accept that? They lure, but of course, we do know that Facebook is what it is. It was initially developed to become, a surveillance tool, and of course is heavily relied upon by the CIA and indeed other security intelligence agencies. And you can bet your bottom dollar that Israel is quite well aware of those of you who are in the alternate media and who are making comments in Facebook that may be just bordering on the political incorrect, that you are noted. Indeed, I am aware that the Anti-Defamation League in B'nai B'rith is developing, if they have not already achieved this, are developing a massive surveillance operation in Silicon Valley that will monitor all the communications going over cell phones and through the internet. So it'll tie in very likely with the Beast of Brussels, a computer system that is basically a database with information on pretty well everybody on the planet. Well, not everybody, but certainly all of us white Westerners, that's for darn sure. They want to make sure they keep an eye on us. And so, yeah. And of course, we do know what that's all about, because it's us white Christians that are the strongest opponents to the Judaic entity. In fact, more and more of us are waking up to the fact that it isn't our Father in heaven who perpetrated that horrific, tortuous act against Jesus of Nazareth, as in the crucifixion. We are now ever more aware that it was the Pharisees and the Sadducees who pushed to have Jesus crucified, because he was teaching the truth of their malfeasance, and they couldn't tolerate that. And because they were always major shit disturbers for the Romans, there's a long history of their troublemaking and attempts at destroying everything that's good and beautiful and true. And so the Romans, they had problems with the Jews, and in order to keep them, from, again, rising up and causing all kinds of trouble and mayhem, Pontius Pilate, well, in those days, one human life didn't really mean all that much. Life was relatively cheap, and so in order to prevent trouble from breaking out, he chose to go along with the Jews. They weren't called Jews back then. Of course, you realize that word didn't come into the lexicon until about the late 17th, early 18th century. So it's a relatively new word that is essentially a word that compiles or brings together a bunch of groups. I mean, remember, there's, according to Arthur Kessler, with his book, The 13th Tribe, that in fact there's 13 Judaic tribes that are collectively called the Jews. But of course, we do know that research has shown that about 90% or so of the people professing to be Jewish are descendants of Khazars. And Khazars are people that were, let's say, an amalgamation of Huns, Tartars, Turks, Mongols, and possibly even Draconian DNA, which essentially coagulated in that region, Khazaria, which is a huge territory that was at one time a huge territory that was made up of what is now the Ukraine, southwestern Russia, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. All of that was at one time Khazaria, and so if you look at that on the map, you'll see that all these migrations went through there, and yeah, some of the most sanguine DNA on the planet is from there. And so these are the people that eventually were pushed north into Poland and Russia and became what are known as the Ashkenazi Jews, and they are the ones that were the Bolsheviks that murdered upwards of 145 million white Christians in the USSR. They were the same people that directed and comprised a significant part of the horde that came west and murdered over 11 million German people after hostilities had ended in World War II. Members of that same tribe, indeed one member, became president of the United States. His name is Eisenhower, and when he was the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe after the war, Second World War, under his direct orders, 1.7 million German POWs were starved to death in the middle of winter, denied all medical attention, shelter, clothing, food. It was horrible. Totally contrary to the Geneva Conventions, all the civilized, if there's such a thing, rules of war. He was known as the Mad Swedish Jew. That's what they called him in this West Point yearbook. And he was not a particularly high-achieving student, similar mediocre level as George Bush, who became president also of the United States, a C-grade student. But Eisenhower was a real nasty son of a bitch. And then he tried to assuage his conscience at some point later when he was president, warning everybody of the military-industrial complex. But, of course, I don't think he ever did use the J word in identifying who runs that show. Yeah. Anyway, let's take another break. And for those of you who have not heard this before, and we're talking about South Africa, which is got the Indian Ocean on one side and the Atlantic, and I mean there's a lot of ocean surrounding a good part of South Africa, and so I wrote a poem some years ago called "My Mermaid from the Sea." And when I first started working with GarageBand in 2016 and the opportunity to record my music, I pulled out my book of poetry and thought, well, that'd be kind of interesting. Let's put a poem to music. And this is really one of my favorite poems, and I really do like what happened as far as the music goes. So, if you want to call in and you can comment, I keep forgetting to give the phone number, but we do have a bit of time left. So the number that you can call in on is 607-203-5423. So 607-203-5423. And that is blogtalkradio.com. That is their radio or their telephone service that connects into this radio program. If I click the right buttons. So anyway, here we go. It's called My Mermaid from the Sea. She came to me on 1,000,000 charging horses. A mermaid or a dream? I caught the flash of her hair, which was golden, as she lay there so silently. The wind it howled and the waves were crashing. Shock waves of terror filled my soul. The sky was dark and the clouds tumultuous as the wind howled ominously. An angel lay in the sand before me, washed ashore in that stormy sea from a ship which smashed up over yonder because the light they could not see. Oh, sweet angel, do not die before me. Let me breathe the life back into thee. Die not here, or not forever. Do not return to that horrible sea. She coughed once, twice, and started breathing. My sanguine heart raced violently. I covered her in my old sou'wester and carried her home to the blazing tree. Over time, she had gotten better. She smiled again on day 3. Her eyes were like the raging ocean. Her thanks were salty like the sea. So deeply we swam in love's warm waters. My mind had reeled deliriously. She became my sweet and joyous lover, my golden mermaid Wow, that track sounds really compromised. I hope it didn't come out like that, weird sounding to the rest of you, but it's sure over my headset. Sounds like that soundtrack's been compromised somehow. It was a lot clearer the last time I played it, so I don't know what the story is there. But at any rate, let's have another commercial, which it's very interesting. National socialism, in my opinion, is the only viable political system that has proven to work. And a lot of the information pertaining to National Socialism is contained in the brilliant book by the marvelous Adolf Hitler. His book, Mein Kampf, next to the Bible, is likely the most sold book on the planet. Not so much in the Western world, but certain lots of other places on the planet, people have read Mein Kampf, a brilliant political, historical analysis, philosophy, anecdotes. It was a marvelous read. What's interesting about my experience with Mein Kampf is that I had, before reading Mein Kampf, literally consumed a significant piece of a library already, and then read Mein Kampf, and I had come to the exact same conclusions about the Judaic entity as Adolf Hitler had come to, and nowhere did Adolf Hitler espouse in Mein Kampf or in his speeches or indeed in the policies of the National Socialist government of Germany, nowhere is there any indication that there was a policy to mass exterminate Jewish people. Germany sought to do exactly the same thing other European nations had done throughout time, was to expel their Jews once they learned what conniving, scheming, reptilian creatures, murderous psychopaths that they in fact are. They are a parasite, and Germany wanted to shrug them off and relocate them to either Uganda or Madagascar. Now, had I been around at that time and been able to advise the great Führer, I would have suggested South Georgia Island in the South Atlantic, but Madagascar being a far too nice place to grant them that, and Uganda, well, I think it's better they be put on an island where we can surround them with our navies and keep them in check. I would also suggest that their Muslim war dogs be sent there also, and then the Jews and the Muslims can sort it out without affecting the rest of us. I think that's probably the safest way to deal with the Jewish and the Muslim question. Yes, until that's taken care of, the problems we are faced with will continue to accrue. And that is when you look at the extrapolations, it doesn't look all that good for us white Christians. Now, speaking of the word Christians, I mean, there are many different groups within or underneath, let's say, the umbrella of Christianity, and many of them espousing considerably different viewpoints. Catholics are thinking quite a bit differently from Protestants, and within the Protestant group we have Calvinists and we have Lutherans and so on, and then there's the offshoot called Mormons, and then within the Catholic group we have the Eastern Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox Church, which profess to be a form of Catholicism as well. It's all very, very odd to me when I focus on a very important quote that is in the Urantia book, a quote from Jesus of Nazareth, where he said, "Let everyone contemplate God in their own manner under their own fig tree." In other words, it's a private conversation. It's something between you and your Creator, your universal Father, your Father in heaven. And the moment you make a public show of that, it debases the relationship. And I've always maintained that as well. And so, if everybody would take that approach, then we wouldn't have all these different sects and all these different groups. I mean, why do human beings all want to be part of some group, and they will perhaps put their mind in check in order to be part of the group, and simply blindly follow the dictates of the leader, the priests say. Priests actually have done more harm to the development of revealed religion than any other group on the planet. And really it is, as I said, a private conversation. I mean, you are truly hardwired. God is in you and you are in God. You cannot get away from that. And the eternal I am has always been the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. There is no beginning. This reality we live in is an eternal reality. And so all of this claptrap sophistry coming out of some of our physicists, theoretical physicists, about some magical Big Bang that happened without some intelligence setting that off. These people need to give their heads a shake and perhaps return to elementary school and perhaps redo the whole process. At some point they might wake up and realize that the idea of a Big Bang magically happening, and then out of that the entire universe of universes evolved. That's absolute malarkey. It's so nonsensical. It's every bit as absurd as believing that the Germans somehow killed off 6 million Jewish people when there were only 3.3 million in all of Europe to begin with. So the Germans, being miraculous people, they were not that miraculous. And had they actually achieved what the Jewish people claim, the official story of the Holocaust, had they truly achieved that, there would not be any survivors. Would there be? Because given 3.3 million and 6 million supposedly having succumbed due to the machinations of the National Socialists, they must have been burned several times over. And then how is it possible that there are in fact survivors with their hands out getting all these reparations? It has been brought to my attention that Jews in general in Fortress Rothschild, i.e. Israel, don't have to work. They may own enterprises, but the actual physical work, other than counting shekels, is generally done by Palestinians who are able to find some work and hopefully get paid by their Jewish masters. But having had some experience with trying to get money out of Jewish people, it's sometimes a hard go. They don't let go of their shekels easily and are quite content to treat you, the goy, as a slave, which in their mind you actually are anyway. And if you wear a cross around your neck to proclaim proudly that you are a Christian believer, then it's a double issue, really, because the cross for the Jew means it's a slave wearing that. In fact, the cross was one way that Romans tortured slaves to death. It was a torture instrument used for subclasses, for Untermenschen, not for, let's say, a Roman citizen. And it wasn't that easy to put a death penalty on a Roman citizen, but when that did happen, and it did happen, it wasn't done by crucifixion. It was done generally by a rapid decapitation or a sword thrust into the chest through the heart between the clavicle and the shoulder blade, and then it just thrust down there, and death was relatively quick. Taking a little break. We have some 17 minutes left to this program, and so it shouldn't all be talk, although it's blog talk radio, but I think music is always nice to have as well, and there are lots of choices here for me. So I'm just scrolling down the list, and I will pick something that might be of interest. And so let me see. How about this one? This is Better Dead Than Red. Yeah, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Getting back to King Kuibaha's ideas regarding the importance of agriculture and that being a very significant focus for the new nation, the Free State of Good Hope. Agriculture is, of course, a very significant enterprise, and of course, if we do not eat, we don't live, just like if we don't have water, we don't live either. And water, albeit the Kalahari is presently a desert area, there is water. there has to be water, given that at one time, as I said, there was agriculture there in the Kalahari. And so King Kuibaha is aware of that, and of course food is going to be a major concern globally. And so if, well, it's not if, but when it happens that the State of Good Hope secedes from the rest of South Africa, that agriculture will become a major focus, as will education. The Khoisan people are very well aware of the importance of education. Indeed, the Khoi readily took to white man's introduction of education and realized that that was one of the reasons white people achieved what they did. And so the Khoi people took to education, and indeed Khoi scholars have risen from the ranks. And when you listen to King Kuibaha speak, you hear a very eloquent philosopher talking, a very intelligent man who has a vision. And I so hope that we can realize that vision for South Africa and for the Khoisan and for the white people there, for all the well-meaning, Christian-minded, not necessarily people going to church, but people who recognize that the Golden Rule and 10 Commandments are the best way for us to live in harmony together. And so, let's hope that happens. But of course, you know that freedom and free speech and all of these attempts at freedom and self-determination is very heavily, let's say, strongly prevented from being achieved by those who want to enslave us all. And one of the issues, of course, there is that we are enslaved very heavily by their machinations, their control of finances of the planet's economy. And when you don't have money, it's very hard to do anything. And so again, I repeat, if you do have an interest in these matters and you wish to support King Cornelius III and the Khoisan people and the people of South Africa that want to secede, please do consider funding by sending money via the RadioFreeSouthAfrica.com website. Yes, the other thing that I wanted to touch on is that unless the United Nations may even get involved in this and large countries start helping to support this enterprise and to recognize the plight of white people, we really are facing very dire circumstances, not just in South Africa, but white people are facing dire circumstances around the world. I mean, look at what, for example, has happened in Sweden. Sweden is a country where angels lived, where people never thought a bad thought, it seems like. And they thought, we can open up the doors. Of course, largely because of the Jews that were there pushing this agenda, opened up the doors to the invaders. And now Malmo, for example, is considered the rape capital of the planet. It has become an extremely dangerous place for white people. And lots of people are saying that Sweden is in fact lost, that country within another generation essentially will be a Muslim nation. Germany is quickly on its way there as well, and other countries, France. It's absolutely horrible to see photographs of present-day Paris downtown, where a lot of these invaders have set up shop on the sidewalks with their mattresses and their filth. Rats are now proliferating once again in many cities in Europe. because of the influx of these creatures that are not very keen on personal hygiene. In fact, there are some that don't even know how to use a modern toilet. Yeah, so that is being perpetrated, and it is very much similar to the invasion of rats in the 15th century, also at the behest of the Jewish entity, letting loose bubonic plague-infected rats into Venice. Eventually, 30% of the European population was dead. So that is part of the plan. The Judaic entity wants to genocide a significant percentage of the white race, and they're doing a pretty damn good job of it. I mean, with their chemtrails, with their fluoride in drinking water, the various toxins in prepared foods, even toxins sprayed on fresh foods, pharmaceuticals. In North America, it's estimated that pharmaceuticals kill around 300,000 people a year. And there hasn't been no declaration of war on Judaic pharmaceuticals, but there is a war on drugs, as in the illegal drugs. But when you look at statistics, the number of people that died from using marijuana, for example, is 0. And the numbers of people that are dead because of heroin or cocaine are really small numbers when compared to the deaths that result from the misuse or overuse of pharmaceutical products. So, to put things in perspective, and when you actually look at the truth of the matter, it really makes you wonder, why are we continuing to put up with this? Prior to 1937, 85% of pharmaceuticals were derived from cannabis hemp, and the balance came from coca and from opiates, from opium poppies. Papaver somniferum, which is opium poppy, and a tonic, a marvelous tonic, very good for the human being, is a cup of opium tea in the morning and a cup of opium tea at night. It helps you sleep really well. It helps to focus your mind. Like I say, it's extremely beneficial. And our brain has receptor sites for these particular plant byproducts, these pharmaceutical grade plant byproducts. We also have receptor sites for the THC from marijuana, for example. And so we are hardwired to interact with these beneficial plants, but they're denied us, and then we're sold chemical concoctions made by largely Jewish enterprises, which they charge hugely for. A product that may cost them 0.001 cent, they will upcharge like 300% or more, 3,000% or more. In one case, I'm aware of a drug that had, I think, a 30,000% profit margin for the pharmaceutical company. And so that really is obscene. And, we have heard talk from some of these people that own these companies that they want to raise the price of very important pharmaceutical products up by 700% or more, and causing tremendous hardship for people relying on these products to maintain their health at some modicum level. So, yeah, it's a sad story. The Judaic influence and presence here has resulted in a tremendous amount of mayhem, and indeed they do admit that they are destroyers. And as my friend Andrew Carrington Hitchcock has aptly identified their synagogue, just as Jesus did, their synagogue of Satan, titled a marvelous book by that name, a compilation of a whole lot of history about the Jews, which when you have read that, you will realize that why you should be Jewophobic as well as Islamophobic. So again, I repeat, go to stratosphericus.com, my website, or Gertjan.ca, and avail yourself of that book as a PDF. It's 156 pages. The horror an in-depth look into the Quran. It's not highly expensive, but well worth the price, and certainly will help you to make some important decisions with regard to Islam and whether you should accept Muslims into your community or not. Quick note regarding my friend Monica Schaefer. She is, as far as I know, still in a maximum security penitentiary in Munich. If you go to my Dowder Rabbit Holes, you will find information pertaining to Monica Schaefer in the issue there where I spoke about Anne Frank's diary. And you'll find mailing information for Monica. Maybe send her a greeting card that would cheer her up. It's a very sad thing that's going on in Germany, where somebody from another nation can be picked up out of her seat in a courtroom and handcuffed and hauled off to solitary confinement. I mean, Monica is a real sweet, gentle soul, a musician and a truth warrior, but certainly not a danger, poses no threat to anybody. And so it's a real obscene thing that has happened there. And, you know, if you have a moment, please put Monica Schaefer in your prayers. Hopefully she will come out of there sane and sound and soon. So we're approaching the end of this program, Radio Free South Africa, with your guest host, Gertjan Zwiggelaar, on Blog Talk Radio and Resolution RDO Network. It's been a great pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed this evening's show, and I will be back next Tuesday.